Alright, so went ahead, got my top plate all put together, got the linkage squared away on top of each other there, got my brake pads on, and we'll trim up this other stuff and after we kind of get the rest of the linkage built, but for right now it's good enough. You want to just make sure the front and the rear linkage there is right on top of each other and straight up and down, so that when the linkage is pulling through there, it's pulling everything good and straight, and so it can be working the best it can. It's a nice snug fit on this new top plate design with the 2.1. Screw down the top plate here. Not really too concerned about those being all tight and snug just yet. Take a peek at the manual, kind of see what it says. I think it's kind of front end, then rear end goes on. So we got the rear end all put together as well. I do have the sweet new skid plates for the rear, but I don't have them out right now, and I'm not really going to dig around and search for it. When we finish the car, I'll add the skid plates on later. Not too worried about it right now. That fresh bulkhead, those smaller screws don't really want to run in. We'll have to do those bad boys by hand here. Pretty stoked to have this thing almost looking like a roller. This build's gone really well. Yeah, this new plastic that they changed to, kind of for like the ET, NT, definitely a little stiffer on the bulkheads. Once you get that threads kind of set into them, it's not bad, but a little tough this first time, but all good. I think it was a great change for the material. This is kind of peace of mind for customers. You can definitely screw up your diff shimming a little bit, and they're not going to be paying the price and having DNFs and stuff like that, which is awesome. So with the 2.1, the C block is a little bit different. It has 2 extra screws to hold it in place. So I'm going to add some blue Loctite to those. Switch over drill chuck here. Put those bad boys in. Going into aluminum, I'll go ahead and just drive those things all the way in. Not worry about it too much. Put the other plastic ones into the bulkhead. Won't run those all the way in. Boom. Just like that. Front and rear end. Looking good. Got some crazy droop going on in the back. So, gonna just adjust those droop screws a little bit. So it's not quite so crazy. There we go. Yeah, this thing is looking good. Alright, chassis brace. I run just the single long chassis brace, which I would assume they say is what you should run in the manual. Let's see, yep. So, gonna put this thing in place. Believe it would be that screw, which is the 28 and 18. Not quite all the way in. Finish it off by hand. Flip this thing upside down. Put the chassis brace screws in the bottom. Boom, got those in. So I think next thing to do is servo. Got me a fresh JTP Nitro Pro CT2 servo. Love these stinking things. You know, I might be a little bit biased, but not too biased. I think for the price, best 8-scale servo you can buy. Even if this thing was priced at 200 bucks, which it's not, they are 135, which is ridiculously priced, probably priced too low. Even if these things were 200 bucks, I would still say probably one of the best servos you could buy. If not the best servo you could buy for 8-scale. I think they're pretty darn awesome. They feel really good. Have a really cool, innovative case design. And man, last a long time. They just work really good in my opinion. I threw new servos in my build at the start of the year for DNC, and it's the only car I've ran all year long. It's done every big race and still on those same servos. Some people might be like, you know, 1 year on servos. For a pro driver at my level, that's not too common. Most of the drivers are swapping their servos out a lot more often than that. And I just don't really feel like I need to. Servos are lasting great. Backlash is staying pretty tight. And I'm not really having any issues with them. So yeah, I couldn't be happier really. They're freaking phenomenal. Use some Lunsford 14s here. With these servos, you want to use a flathead screw to kind of self-center the servo into the mount. Looks super clean and sick as well when you do it that way. But it's also the best function. If you were to put just a regular screw, doesn't quite center and could possibly move around on you a little bit in the mount, which is something you don't want. So flathead screw so that it can self-center itself in the holes. Boom, look at that. These things look so sick. Some of you might not know, I actually do all my own design work for JTP, which is pretty cool. I like doing the design work, and it's pretty fun. I'm definitely not a designer by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel like I have a good taste for things, and I like designing stuff. I can get by on Illustrator barely. Put the top screw in here for the front chassis brace slash servo mount. Flip this thing back upside down. I will put the two 3mm screws in first. Since I have that chuck already in, swap over to the 2.5, throw those screws in. Again, not running them all the way in. Got a freshy car, don't need to strip out any screws. One thing that happens when you're building a fresh car is those screws are making all the threads, so they get a little bit hotter than normal. So the screw's pretty hot going in, and sometimes if you just, if you're used to like your clutch kicking in, sometimes since the screw's real hot and the plastic's hotter, it will just kind of keep going, and you can strip them out a little bit easier, I would say, than normal. So if we go by the manual here, it's going to say move on to the shocks. I'm going to skip that for now and jump into the next steps, which is building the rest of the radio tray and putting in another freshy servo. Open up this case. Man, love that box too. Looks so good. Designed the box as well, which I thought turned out pretty cool. Alright, so one thing I wanted to point out, I already did it, is for the radio box. It's a little hard to see, but right there I dremeled a slot in there, and that's where I will run my battery wires out, because I don't really like trying to squeeze them out this hole back here. I just find it's way too tight, and yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just way too tight. I don't really want to damage my wires. So alright, got my steering servo wire lined up there in that little guide. So now I'm just going to bolt this side guard in before I do anything else. So to me, I can get to these screws a little bit easier. I've already Loctited all these screws. All of your side guard screws, put some blue Loctite on. Sometimes I feel like these side guard screws are kind of hard to like get started every once in a while, because you have a little bit of kick up in the chassis, and so if you're having a hard time with it, kind of just move the screw a little bit to change the angle, get it to start biting. Don't force it too hard, don't push really hard with the wrench, because you can cross thread into the aluminum chassis and then you're not going to be that stoked. So if you do have a hard time, don't push any harder, just kind of tilt the wrench back into the car a little bit to kind of find that correct angle, and then it will start going into the threads. It's like I think I'm having that problem right here on this front one. Oh, there we go. Sometimes you put a little pressure on it, kind of wiggle it around, you'll hear it almost like pop, and then it's in the correct spot. Last screw going in front of the battery tray. Boom. 2 side guards on. Shoot, this thing's looking like a real car. Oh yeah, I'm stoked. Alright, next. Sorry, angle is not super good here because I'm kind of working on this other side. Maybe I'll try it like this. So, what we got going on next is the throttle servo. And I'm going to get this steering servo wire all through there. Straighten out this throttle servo. Put that wire through. Get that on there like so. Get these nice mirror finished Lunsford screws. Oh, change my bit. This angle, I think I'm covering my face up with my arm doing the drill. Like I said, normally I'd just be standing up. Haven't really done too many videos recently, so I'm not really used to videoing and working. So bear with me a little bit. With the flathead screws, will self-center. You'll kind of see those posts kind of pull in a little bit. Not all servos are like the exact same length, so pull the mount in a little, but it's all good. Tighten these down, and this thing is looking good. All right, so we got that. All we need to do now, put this receiver box in, slide that in, goes through the bottom, couple more flathead 12s. I like how Tekno tries not to complicate things too much, and they use a lot of the same length screws, which is nice. You know, sometimes you could, you know, some of these lower tray screws you could put a 10 in or something like that, but you know, just to keep it not so complicated, pretty much all the flat screws on the bottom of the chassis are 12s, and makes it nice and simple, which I think is pretty cool. Alright, got that in. I'm not going to worry about doing the receiver and the battery and all that stuff right now. I think I got to kind of get that stuff prepared first, so not going to do that right now. I'm just going to stuff these cables in there, throw these lids on, get the screws on there so I know I have all of the correct screws that I need. Maybe. Oh, there we go. It's like that lid was a little tight fitting, and for a little bling, of course, gonna bust out some Lunsford 8 button heads for the top of all these lids. I'll show later kind of what I do for my radio tray stuff, as far as how I put my battery in there, what I do to my battery, how I put my receiver in there, and all that fun stuff. I think we're just going to keep the build going right now, and we'll tidy up that stuff a little bit later. Oh man, I pulled out just a random amount of 3x8 Bs. I pulled almost the exact amount out that I needed. I only had one extra. I wasn't even counting those things, so I'm pretty stoked on that. Not going to worry about tightening those down, but there we go. That thing looking good. All right. Shocks. All right, guys, we're back. Time for the shocks. Took some time to open up the bags, kind of prep a little bit so this part doesn't take quite as long. I did want to showcase something. These O-rings that go on the shock collars. If you've built Tekno 8 scale, you know that this is not fun and a very difficult thing to do, but I got a sweet trick for you. So put the O-ring in, get yourself an X-Acto blade. A fresh, sharp blade works best, and what you want to do is put the blade inside the shock collar, and you just go around putting quite a bit of pressure on the O-ring, and you're going to trim material actually right off the O-ring and make it pretty much flat. If you do it correctly, you should have material that came off the O-ring all the way around. It's pretty much flat. Use your X-Acto, pop that O-ring back out. Then using the X-Acto, you can see the O-ring right here. I'm gonna cut it and then just cut like, I don't know, 2 millimeters out of it. And so now you can see it is cut. Now you're going to put the O-ring back inside. You've shaved it down and you've cut some material out. You push it all the way back in, and then you're going to grab a little bit of shock oil, put a little drop of shock oil on the O-ring, move it around with your finger, and then you're going to notice that the shock collar is, you can see that I'm threading it on, and I'm not yelling, screaming, possibly crying, ripping the skin right off of my fingertips, and you're going to be stoked that it was that easy to put on. So awesome trick. I already did my other 3 shocks, but wanted to do one for you guys. Next cool trick, you see the shock boot. You can do scissors, or I use little snips like this, and you're basically just going to go inside and snip just a little slot in the not sure if you're going to be able to see that or not, but I just make a little snip in the groove that seats into the shock in the boot, and that helps kind of let some air out so that the boot doesn't get stuck up. You just need 1 slot per boot is all you need. Try not going like all the way through to the outside because you'll kind of tear the boot. You just want to slot it through that grooved area, or that protruding area, I guess you would call it, that locks into the groove. And now we'll go ahead, build the shocks. Got a couple more tips. Another tip would be this little, I don't know, we call it like the shock hat. If you can see this, that is the tall one, and that's like the last shock piece you put in. I use the small ones on all 4 shocks. I feel like the shocks work better when you use the small ones and not that big spacer at the end. So with that, it does change your up travel on your rear shock, so I will address that later, but just wanted to say something about that. I'm going to go ahead, start building all of these. Put the first little bushing inside. Just going to knock out all 4 shocks at once. I already put grease on all of these O-rings, so they're ready to go. Use shock O-ring grease, works great. So you go O-ring, spacer, O-ring, and then the smaller little hat spacer, we call it. I already got the O-ring on the shock body. Use these shock pliers. The small part does the cartridge. So we got O-ring, spacer, O-ring, love building a fresh set of shocks. Did not realize that the 2.1 comes with bladders and with the emulsion O-rings in the cap, so they give you the option to run either, which is pretty cool. You don't have to buy any extra parts if you want to run bladder or emulsion. So these, doing the rear shock here, using the small hat bushing, so the front and the rear will look the same, not have a bushing sticking out the bottom. I am building my car with the kit long shocks. That's what I have been running. Been really happy with it. Been really happy with my setup lately. Really feel like found some good stuff with this 2.1 car, and it's been big, I don't know, learning curve. I feel like this year with just finding some different things and kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, kind of limbo all year, just finding some different stuff, but really happy now. And yeah, really looking forward to any of my next races, especially the World's coming up. I'm stoked. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead, put the pistons on. I'm not going to use the kit pistons. I have been running these kit pistons, but I run the rear all the way around, so the 2x1.6, 4x1.2, 4x0.8. I've been running that front and rear. The kit has a 4x1.3 in the front, so a little less pack in the front piston. I prefer the 1.2 all the way around and 500 CST oil front and rear. I think the kit says quite a bit heavier than that. I've been running 500 with those pistons and running them emulsion. I feel like if you run those kit pistons, you should probably run them emulsion if you want to drill out the rest of the holes to 0.8, kind of like more of the full Wiggins piston style. Then you should run the bladder. So you can kind of go either way with that. I think if you just run the 4.8s, you should run emulsion. If you run the 8.8s, run the bladder. But I have been testing something a little bit different and really having some good success with my running, just kind of at fast lane. But I think it's going to work good at the Worlds and hopefully at some other tracks. So using a different piston here, flat piston combo. That it's an 8-hole piston. So I'm going to be putting these pistons on. Front's done. Do the rears. For building these Tekno shocks, man, this tool is pretty slick. Got little areas for a whole bunch of different, whole bunch of different things. It's kind of, I don't know, I couldn't even really think of building one of these cars without this tool, because for like the balls and for all the different shock pieces and everything, there's a specific use for a bunch of different things with this tool. So definitely get yourself, one of these if you're building some Tekno cars. All right, so now I am going to put all my shock boots on. It's kind of just how I like to do it. And then well, I guess I'm kind of going in from the other direction now. Normally I'm kind of building from the bottom going up because I have my shock ends on. So kind of doing it different now. So I guess I don't have to put my shock boots on quite yet, because I'll get some grease inside of them, which I don't really want. So now I want to talk about shock limiters. With these long rear shocks, highly, highly, highly recommend running shock limiters. So what I run in my shock is on the rear, I put that big hat bushing on, and then I put one of the bushings, the very first bushing that goes into the shock cartridge, put that on next. That is my limiting. It's about 7 millimeters or so. Do both of these shocks. With the long shock, you really need the shock limiters so that if you have a really hard hit, like say here's like a knuckle of a jump, you land like this, your rear wheels, you need limiters in the shock so that the droop screws, you know, kind of hold your droop, but they'll still move and flex and your arm can go down. You need the shock to catch it some so they don't go way down and pop your drive shafts out. The reason you really run droop screws, you know, you want to kind of limit your travel with the shocks, and the droop screws is like a kind of like a backup to keep from pulling your shock apart. If you don't have the droop screws and you're just running them to the shock, kind of like 10 scale, 10 scale is fine because you don't do the big jumps, they're not quite as heavy. But like if you do that same thing, you knuckled like that with no droop screws, you could rip the bottom of your shock apart, pull the shock ends off and stuff like that. So you definitely want to run limiters, and I recommend 7 mil in the back. So now put the shock boot back on, and then with the change of the up travel with going to that different hat, that same kind of that first bushing that goes into the shock, I use that again right there as an external up travel limiter, and I put that on after my shock boot. Now go ahead, screw my shock end on. The middle spacer in like the shock cartridge and everything, if you use 2 of those, it is the same as using one of these. So like if you didn't want to buy a whole bunch of, you know, internal shock cartridge pieces, you could just do that instead, and you know, you can use kind of both of those. But I like to just have one piece there, so that's why I use that instead of the two. So that's kind of my reasoning behind that. But just in case you don't have a bunch of those extra cartridge bushing things, you can use different stuff. Basically, I just screw these on until they snug up. So pretty much right when you can't see the thread, it pretty much snugs up. I don't really try to go too crazy with it. So, and these things feel butter smooth. So now we'll move on to the front. For the front, I use a limiter as well, and I use that same limiter I keep using, that very first bushing that you put in your shock cartridge. So same thing, you just want to limit the travel a little bit so that you don't pull a drive shaft out. And also, I like having limiters at the bottom of my shocks to help from the the vacuum thing that you can get if your shock does go all the way down. Your piston can kind of create like a suction to the bottom of the shock body. So I feel like shock works better if it has a limiter as well, to kind of make sure it doesn't get down there, keeps the piston off the bottom of the shock. One front. All right, last shock. Put my limiter in. On these front shocks, you don't need any external up travel limiters because we didn't change the up travel on the front shock because we use the standard pieces, so the up travel is correct. The rear, you needed to add it because we use that different bushing in the cartridge, so the up travel gets changed, and you want the up travel to be correct. So boom, there we go, 4 shocks ready. I'm gonna throw some oil in with this specific shock setup. It's a little bit different. I'm gonna put 400 in the front. These are actually a 8-hole piston, flat piston, 2 1.3 holes in the front with 6 1.2s, and 8 1.3s in the rear. I'm really happy with this setup so far. I think it's going to be really awesome in Spain. So pretty excited about that. Running these Tekno bladder. It's been working great. So that's how I'll be building them. Fill the shock up with the oil, just pump it. Try to get a whole bunch of the bubbles kind of popping up, and then we just let it sit. So we do 400 front, 500 rear, and these things feel smooth. It's been a minute since I've built a freshy set of shocks. And I didn't say anything, I use the gold shafts. Kit comes with the silver shafts, so I do upgrade my cars to the gold shafts. Sometimes new shocks, they just build a bunch of bubbles too. Pumping it a whole bunch, just try to get all those bubbles to pop through. 500. If you're building a fresh Tekno kit, you don't have JTP shock oil, you should probably order some up. Works really well. Most all the setup sheets you're going to see going to have JTP shock and diff oil in them. And yeah, shop jtp.com. Got everything in stock. Try to ship same day. Most of the time, everything gets shipped same day. We're a tiny little operation. It's just down here in our basement. Just Megan and I. I do most of the shipping. Megan works 3 days a week, so those days, you know, she can't do anything, so she'll help out on the other days. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm shipping the orders out. If I'm at a race, sometimes, you know, can't go same day just because, you know, busy with life going on, and Megan can't normally make it to the post office when she's working. Alright, so now building these bladder, I like to put the bladder in the cap, just like so. And most of the bubbles are gone. Fill it up a little bit. Don't need to have it all the way to the top with the bladder. Let me make sure I got all the right caps. You definitely can't get your caps mixed up, because then you look like a squid. Alright, got my front caps together, got my rear caps together. So I'm gonna screw the cap on and go. I look through the bleed hole on the cap. I don't know if you can see it there. And I look through there until I can see the top of the shock body. I don't put anything in the bleed hole at the top. I start pushing up slowly on the shaft. Push it all the way up. I leave the shock boot on. Don't pull the shock boot down. And then hold it all the way up, not super tight. And then just screw the cap down. That's going to set your oil level. I'm going to wipe it. Use this shock tool again. Keys in on the bottom of the body. Use the wheel wrench, Tekno wheel wrench, or if you have a JTP T-handle, that also keys into the cap. You want to tighten the caps pretty darn tight, and yeah, that pretty much sets the oil level. Pump it up some. Make sure you're not getting any tight spot up at the top. That's when you set the oil level, that's really what you're looking. I'm going to show you. I'll pull the boot down. When you push it up, you don't want it to get tight. So it stays the same all the way up. Doesn't get tight at all. If you're pushing it up and then like right here it starts tightening up, then you have too much oil in there. And if you have too little oil, when you get close to the top, you'll hear it kind of suck some air in, and you'll hear kind of like the bubbles and stuff moving around in there. And so that's going to tell you that you that's something in the air bleeder hole up here. Just kind of weird. Oh, just some metal flashing from when they did the threads. And so if that happens, then you need to take the cap off, you know, pump the shock up, get all the bubbles out, and then you need to go slower when you go up and slower when you're turning the cap because you got too much oil out. So right there, oil level is set really good. I'm going to pump the shock up some more, grab my bleeder screw, and I'm going to run full rebound. So have the shock all the way down, put the screw in the bleeder hole, and that basically sets the pressure of the bladder, and that's at full rebound. And now you'll see that the shock is rebounding down. Got one done. These are the front shocks. This one needs a tiny bit more oil. These bladders seem a little bit smaller in diameter than some of my other ones I've had. They're kind of falling out of the cap. Same thing. Screw it down till you can start seeing the top of the shock body through the little hole. Slowly push it up. You get up to the top. Now I'm gonna start turning the cap down. Key the body in, tighten the cap, feels good, oil level set, pump it some, full extension, put the bleed screw in. Yep, good rebound. So I can go ahead and put the spring. I use the kit orange spring quite a bit in the front. I normally run orange or a red. Oh, that's what I was going to check. Does it show spring color up or down in the manual? Doesn't have color in the pictures. Darn it. We can't tell. Obviously, you run the paint color down. So, that's how you're supposed to do it. Put the little bushing in at the top. On the front shock, I like to have the little bleed hole there facing the back of the car. Well, actually, both shocks I have that bleed hole facing the back of the car, and I do the bleed hole on the cap towards the inside of the car. Then you do this set screw at the bottom to the outside of the car. And that is a very nicely built shock. Boom. Do this other front. Man, these things look good and feel good. Put the set screw in on the shock cup, or the spring cup, I mean. Alright, let's knock a rear out. Grab the 500 oil this time. Fill the shock up a little bit. Yeah, these bladders seem a little different. Falling out of the cap. So, same thing. Screw it down so you can just see top of the shock body. Slowly push the shaft up. Start going down. Oil's coming out. Tighten up that cap. Oh yeah, that one feels good too. Pump it. Pump it, pump it, pump it. Full extension on the rear shock as well. And put the bleed screw in. See how that rebound feels? Oh yeah, some nice rebound. Got the up travel limiter there. Now, on the rear, kit comes yellow. I've been running orange. One thing you'll notice with these new rear springs is they fit really tight on the shock collar and the spring cup. I use a sanding drum, sand a little bit out on the inside, especially on the side you're going to put on the shock collar, because adjusting your ride height will be really difficult when they're tight on the shock collar like that. It will actually wind the spring up and really jack up the handling of your car, or you need to pull the spring down a little bit, adjust your ride height, and then make sure that spring fully pops back on, which I feel is just a little bit difficult to do. So yeah, that's why I sand a little bit of that material away so that it will spin nice and free on the shock collar there, and then I don't even have to worry about it. Paint side down, of course. And boom, got a rear shock done. Super stoked on these things. Going together good. Feeling buttery smooth. Add a little bit of 500. Keep this bladder in the cap. Start threading it on. You can see the top of the body. Push it up slowly. We're at the top. Building these shocks bladders pretty good. feel like you can get them really consistent, and the oil level won't really change, but like since I'm building these in my basement, it's a cool temperature down here. It's probably like 65 degrees. When I set that pressure in the cap, once I go out and drive, get my car in the sun, say it's like 80 degrees, the pressure is going to change. So what's nice that we run full rebound, all you have to do in between runs, before you run, whatever, you get out in the ambient temperature that you're going to be racing, just pop the, you know, like me, I run the bleed screws to the inside. Can't remember if I tightened my shock cap or not. I think I did. I run the bleed screw to the inside, so I have to take the shocks off the tower, you know, move them to the side some, undo the bleed screw, just take it all the way out, and just put it right back in, and you'll set the air pressure for the bladder to the correct temperature that you're driving, and your shocks will be awesome. So if you build them in a different temperature than what you're driving, you'll definitely want to do that. And you can even just do that, you know, even just in between runs, just throughout the day. It's not a bad thing to do, just to make sure your shocks are working really, really well. And so, yeah, good little tip for that. All right. Last shock. Man, just cranking through this build. It's looking like a darn race car. Clean up a little. Now, we'll go ahead, throw these bad boys on. So, right front gets a silver reverse thread mounting screw. And like I said, you want to put the shocks on the correct way. So the big flat piece goes in first. The groove side of the shock cap goes on the outside. So I do cap, air screw to the back, bleed screw to the inside, set screw on the spring cup to the outside of the car, silver on the right front, black regular thread on the left front. Get my nut driver chuck here. Put my clutch on like 3 so I don't screw these things up. You don't want to over tighten your shocks. Just put them on the bottom there. And now we'll do the tops. Let me peek at the manual, see what it says for recommended positions. Let's see. I think I might actually be in the recommended position on the front. Can't quite see what position it says. Yeah, so it's one from the outside. It's a little hard to tell, honestly, looking at these pictures. You can tell it's one from the outside on the one side. The other side there, it looks a little bit different. And then they do, I think, 2 from the outside and the rear, which that balance is a little bit different than what I'm running. So I'm gonna put mine, yeah, so they do center on the rear. I'm gonna go 1 from the outside, front and rear on mine. It's like I said earlier, our car is pretty sensitive to where the shocks are on the tower. And so, you know, different driving styles, different track conditions, stuff like that. Maybe just mess around with it a little bit, find out what you like, and when you like that stuff. So I definitely move mine quite a bit. Mainly just between like 2 positions. So this is kind of the farthest outside that I run, and then I'll go, I guess, 3 positions. I'll go 1 to 2 more inside, depending. I feel like you get a little bit more rotation, a little bit more movement in the car as you lean them in, a little bit more stability as you stand them up. Oh man, this thing is looking good. So now move on to the rear, and the reverse thread is opposite because front of the arm here, back of the arm here. So we go left front, or I'm sorry, left rear gets the silver reverse thread. Make sure all the shock stuff is going the correct direction. Black regular thread goes on the right rear. So then on the rear, upper row, since I have the long shock, and 1 from full outside. Where'd my other one go? There you go. And if you have both of these Tekno camber wrenches, you can use them. Use the small side on one end, big side on the other end, which is the nut side. So for me, this is kind of the balance that I always try to keep. Basically, from the, if you're counting from the outside, they're always the same. If you count from the inside holes, there'll be 1 different. So I would call this 3 position in the front and upper 4 position in the rear. Since I'm on the third hole from the inside on the front tower, 4th hole from the inside on the rear tower. All right. Boom. Just like that. Got a pretty stellar looking ride so far. Shocks on. Good looking roller. Servos are in. Yeah, baby.